So first of all, it's really great to be back in Milan today, and with all of you, I've been here many times in the past, so I'm very, very happy to be here. So the way I structured this, I structured is some thoughts for Milan. You know, Milan has a new mayor who was the head of Expo, and I thought, I was thinking about, what could be some ideas for the city or some things. This could apply to Milan or other cities. And I put together both some projects we do at Senseable City Lab, a bit more theoretical, but also some of the more architectural one we do with our design office. So let's start. But in order to start, I really wanted to go back to the beginning of architecture. And if you look at this is Vitruvius. And if you look at Vitruvius and his definition of architecture is really very, very material. For Vitruvius, architecture is what you build. Is very, very static. But then if you look at somebody who was inspired a lot by Vitruvius, such as Battista Alberti, that is one of the first editions, he was writing in Latin, but Battista Alberti has a different take on architecture. Battista Alberti thinks that architecture is not just the physical stuff you put. It's not just like Louis Kahn would say a brick on the top of a brick. Yes, you have a brick, but you have much more. And actually, he starts and says, the first thing is that, an architect is not somebody, is not a lumberjack, somebody who gets wood. He said, legnaiuolo. And then he said, it's interesting, he talks about corpora in Latin. And if you look at corpora, in the way he uses it always has this double meaning. Is our bodies, both as the physical bodies of architecture, those columns, those ceilings, but it's the bodies of all of us. It's interesting. This is in an editorial I did with friends in the Architectural Review recently. We went to look at analyze this. We call it living bits and bricks. So how you can add to that component to the bricks the dynamic response, the response that today comes from digital. And if you look at that, if you look at how corpora was translated in many languages, incidentally, Battista Alberti, his book, was translated by great people in all different countries. So it was Paolo Portoghesi in this country, and he translates it in Italian as corpi. If you look at François Choet in France, is also translated as corps. And all of them have the double meaning. Joseph Rickford, who has a beautiful translation into English, he also uses the same ambiguity. And to me, that ambiguity, for us, is really the starting point of architecture. That, yes, starts with a brick, but then goes one step further. Try to see how that brick can become a living brick. How we can think about, as we mentioned here, about living bits and bricks. And today, this idea is finally becoming possible. It's becoming possible. This idea, many people dreamed about this. It's the old dream of Cedric Price when he was using cybernetics back in the 1960s. But Cedric Price didn't have the access to a lot of the new network technologies we have today, to internet, which is becoming Internet of Things. Is entering the buildings you design, is entering our lives, is entering industry, and is helping us to actually create a new interaction with things around ourselves. So, I wanted to share with you a few things. Again, I structured it as ideas for a city. Could be Milan, could be another city, but starting with mobility. Now, if you look at mobility, we all know that the city of the 20th century was shaped by the automobile. The city, as we know it today, would not be the same thing if we didn't have the big automobile revolution in the 20th century. But mobility is changing a lot today, and we believe that the city of tomorrow, just maybe in 10 years or so, will be very different because of some of these changes. And I wanted to start with a project we did in New York. It's a project we did with some data that was, data is very important. Data means you know much more the city or the building. So in this project, we started with data from the mayor of New York that was made available public by Mayor Bloomberg. Mayor Bloomberg was obsessed with data. He built an empire, his entire career on data, his company and so on. So in his office in New York, he had a little sign that said, "In God we trust, everybody else bring data." And through his work as mayor, he actually worked a lot in order to make data more accessible. And one of the data sets that he made accessible is this data set that tells you in New York every taxi trip, pickups and drop-offs in the city. Every dot is somebody gets onto a taxi or gets off a taxi. So that is JFK Airport in New York. If you zoom out, here you see Manhattan and all of the boroughs. And then you can ask yourself, you know, these days we like to share many things. We like to share apartments on Airbnb, couches on couch surfing platform. So what would happen if people were ready to share mobility more? If you look at 2 points in Manhattan, you got hundreds of thousands of trips connecting those 2 points. And so in order to do this, we looked at mathematics to address that problem. Big data often, we say, requires big mathematics to solve it, to understand it. We use a system called shareability network. That was the paper, if any of you is interested. And we analyzed the thing, and what we found is quite interesting. In New York, if people were ready to share mobility, you could cut 40% of the vehicles and still satisfy the mobility demand of the city, which is quite impressive. A couple of things that happened. The paper is from a year and a half ago, I guess, but the first results came out earlier. They actually came to the attention of Uber. Since then, we started a major collaboration with Uber, and as you might know, Uber Pool does exactly that. Allows 2 people to share a car. And Uber Pool is interesting because it means you're taking 2 trips and turning them into one. So you're removing 1 car from the street, you're reducing congestion, energy consumption, and pollution. The other thing that's interesting is that when this came out, the New York Times did a review of our article, and the New York Times wrote, you know, sure, this is interesting from an academic point of view, but, you know, no New Yorker would want to share anything else with any other New Yorker, let alone a car. Now, it turns out that that was not the case, and now that we're working with a lot of Uber data, Uber Pool has been a huge success of people all over the world sharing a trip with somebody else. In San Francisco, over 50% of all trips every day by Uber are actually done by Uber Pool, 2 people sharing the same car. And so that's an interesting point of how, you know, you could change the city by looking at data, by analyzing data, and then by using that in order to create, in this case, something that's a new mobility system, as Uber has done. I'll tell you next time what our students want to do as next step, which is combine Uber Pool and Tinder Grindr, but that's a different story. So some people were saying that at the beginning also that, you know, this works in New York, but what about many other cities around the world? And so this is a paper from just a couple of weeks ago where we actually looked at many cities. We discovered some universal laws of shareability in cities. And actually that's quite interesting from the point of view of how it can help us to, to apply this not only in a city as dense as New York, but potentially in many parts of the world. Now, the other thing that's changing with mobility is that our cars are getting more and more sensors, including those 2 little ears that you see there. And those 2 little ears are like the human eyes. They do a 3-dimensional scan of the city, like this. Then you take this, you feed it into an artificial intelligence system, and bam, the car drives itself. So it becomes a self-driving car. Well, the interesting thing, first of all, is that this is not the future, this is the past. You know, Uber started testing this last year. We've been working with the government of Singapore to do the first deployment of self-driving cars accessible to anybody in the city. And the amazing thing is that if you got a self-driving car, then the car can give you a lift in the morning when you go to your office, and then can give a lift to somebody else in your family, or to anybody else in the city. So they are creating a new system of transportation in between public and private transportation. And they become quite interesting because if you combine what we said before about sharing the ride with this, which is sharing the car itself, the combination of both could give you a city such as Milan or New York or Sydney or Singapore, a big city or a small city, where you could satisfy the whole demand of the city for mobility with 20% of the cars we have today. And think about how different the city would be if you were to remove 8 cars out of 10. How different in terms of parking or the width of the streets. Really the urbanism of the city, the very structure of the city, how it could change through this. So just a simple example about what is happening right now in mobility and how, in the same way as mobility changed the city in the past century, mobility today could change the city in this century. Other things might change a few years from now when everything will be self-driving. At the moment, it's a reality, the technology, but think about a few years when everything will have that intelligence, then other things might change, such as this one. That's a well-known traffic light, and traffic lights ended up on our roads, actually when cars arrived on our roads. But if you got an intelligent system where every car knows where the others are and can then in real time adjust, you don't need to stop anymore. You can keep on going, just avoiding crashes. A little bit like this. Don't try it yet. I showed this some time ago in Naples, and they told me, so what is new here? I'm Italian, so I can say it, but that's actually from a former Italian minister who said that in Milan, traffic lights are instructions. In Rome, they're suggestions. In Naples, they are Christmas decorations. But if you look at this, again, mathematically is an interesting thing to study an intersection. An intersection seems very, very simple, but it gets easily complex. You got different frequencies arriving to the intersection. You got different, throughputs and different trajectories. So what we've been doing recently is actually studying and generalizing the problem of intersections. And what you see here is the same intersection, a real one, in Singapore. To the left, managed using the most sophisticated traffic light system we have today. And to the right, managed using a slot-based system, similar to the ones you find in airports and so on. And look at the difference between the two, in terms of number of cars waiting and delays, to the left and to the right. But so how this, can, if you solve the traffic light problem, you solve automatically most of the network. Because, that's the key problem, the key point, the key bottleneck in an urban network. Now, just one quick thing about how is this going to change the city. We believe in many ways, the new transportation systems, but just one thing out of a project we are doing right now in Singapore. So in Singapore, we are building one of the tallest skyscrapers at the moment in Singapore. And there we have a big parking space. Now, we know the parking space might not be needed in 5 or 10 years if mobility changes a lot. And so from the beginning, we actually thought about the parking space as something that could be converted. So we put the distance between the floors higher. We also put the ramps outside, so that basically you can use it as a parking space, but then over time you can convert it into other things. So that was the first thing I wanted to share with you. It's about mobility and how this might have an impact on the city, how we know it today. The second thing I wanted to share with you is about working spaces. And I did an op-ed, an editorial in the Harvard Business Review recently. And the point was, the title they gave was, if work is digital, why do we still go to the office? And, if you can work anywhere, all of you could work anywhere you want. You could probably see all of your classes just through remotely, online. So why do you need to still go to the same place? And I think that's an important question. So I think to look at that, we need to go back to some of the origin of modern architecture. And if you look at this guy, most of you know this guy, is Le Corbusier, and in the 1930s, when he was writing together with Siam different documents, including the Charte d'Athènes, what he was saying is that, in a city we need to divide everything in a very clear way. Place for living, place for working, place for leisure, and the connections between. But if you look at that city is absurd. If you look at that, you're building 3 cities that are empty most of the time, and then, they just work for, say, 8 hours, 5 hours, 9 hours per day, but the rest, they become totally dead. So that idea, luckily, was abandoned in the 50s and 60s. Many people, including Jane Jacobs, started thinking about the city more as a mixed-use element, mixed-use urban fabric. But we think that is changing again today because of the new flexibility we have, the flexibility you enjoy every day by the fact that like 10 years ago you were chained to a computer desk. You were chained to a desk, you couldn't move. Today you can actually do the same things here and anywhere else you want. And we think that this is going to change the transition between public and private and the very structure of our buildings. So let me give you a quick example from our campus at MIT. What you see here is Boston. I need to tell you, Boston is quite a green city. I'm sorry, here looks like a post-Trumpian nuclear explosion. That's not just because it was a winter picture. You see MIT like a small city inside the city. Harvard, don't bother, up there. And MIT was one of the first places in the world to test, that started thinking about itself as a university as a testbed for new technology. So one of the first places in the world to be, for instance, totally covered by Wi-Fi. And so because of that, we saw something interesting. People used to work, as you see, to the left, and now work, as you see, to the right. Now, this picture is a bit extreme. To the left, you see one of the most appalling computer rooms I could find, really depressing, no daylight and so on. To the right, you actually see a beautiful sunny day. I need to tell you, during the winter when it was -20, was not exactly the same thing. But basically, this is a big change that happened all over the world. It's about going from this, and there's poor people all over the world who have been working and still working this, even if this Jacques Tati in playtime, making fun of the cubicle. And now people working more like this. You know, the idea that the only thing that's important now when we come together is human interaction. It's not about a cubicle where you execute tasks. Forget about that. Artificial intelligence, robots will execute those tasks tomorrow. You don't need humans to do it. But the only thing you still need is how we can come together. And I think, you know, the beautiful convening here for Architecture Week that Stefano and the team have been organizing is part of this, is how we can come together, exchange ideas, talk to each other. So that becomes the only reason we really need to go to an office place today. So we said, well, if this is what's happening, what if we take actually the data from the network? The network is changing the way we live and work. So what if we monitor the network to understand better what is going on? So we took all the data, big data from the MIT network. Every dot is an access point. And then you can see people that actually wake up in part of the campus, move around. You know, you see here the different hours of the day where people are on the campus. If you look at the aggregated information on campus, it looks a little bit like that. So there you see a Monday morning. You see Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, so the first day of the week, Monday morning. You will see people getting to the campus around 9 or 10 a.m. At 5 p.m., a few people go away. You see at 5 p.m., you see there's a little drop, but not that much. Most people keep on working, you know, till very late, 8, 9, 10 p.m. Even in the middle of the night, you still have a lot of activity. And the same thing happens on Monday, on Tuesday, on Wednesday, on Thursday. Not on Friday. Like all over the world, activity slips away very quickly, as you see there on the MIT campus. And you go Saturday and Sunday, which is almost like 2 normal days. You know, you remove the 9 to 5 people, but it's almost like 2 normal days. With something quite interesting, every Sunday night, you had the little dent around 9 p.m. You see it there. And actually, that's when people say, you know, shit, tomorrow is Monday again. And you remember all the things you haven't done before the beginning of the new week, so you actually try to do them on Sunday night. Now, if you do this, you again analyze every room. Beware, this is the dream of architects. This has been the dream of many, many architects. If you go back and read the Treaty on Urbanism by Cerdà, Cerdà is the father of modern Barcelona. He's the guy who created the example. So the new urban blocks, the big courtyards with cut corners that actually have shaped modern Barcelona. In his book, he has a sentence we say, no, I dream of one day when I'll be able to measure things like this, where people are, how people use space. You know, that's a crucial thing if you really want to turn architecture into something where you can create feedback loops and so on. So anyway, you can measure this for every room, and you can analyze it again with mathematics, different type of mathematics. And what you find is this, which is very similar to what I was saying at the beginning, the fact that many activities now overlap over the same space. You know, think about this space as well. It's what's happening here with people working there, some people having a meeting. Here we are having a conversation. So how this increased flexibility allows us to overlap many functions on the same space. And that's something we are studying now also in terms of output. Can we use this information to also understand what we produce? If you are a university, most likely you will produce papers and patents. So here it shows you papers and patents being produced on the MIT campus. And then you want to see about the network of all the buildings and all the people connecting. So the question is, you know, can you really think about the way where we can better measure human interaction and output in building, and how architecture, yes, can measure the impact of architecture in order to help foster more connection and a better space to live in. So again, you know, that's part of the ongoing project, but we're already applying this in some spaces we design. This is our design we did last year for TAG, Talent Garden in Calabiana. You know, it's an existing space we refurbished. Talent Garden is one of the big operators for co-working spaces in Italy. This is the entrance of Talent Garden. This actually will be opened after tomorrow by President Mattarella, the Italian president, in Turin. It's the Fondazione Agnelli. And there it's interesting because, you know, when the Fondazione Agnelli was the home of the founder of Fiat over 100 years ago. And at the time, and then in the 50s and 60s, that building was a building totally segregated, where you had a space, you know, where Henry Kissinger and Gianni Agnelli would meet. So, but it was totally separate. People didn't interact much. So what we try to do is turn that into a space that, again, is a co-working space where people from the top of the company to any other level of the company, young people and older people, they all work together in the same space. Because the only remaining thing is how we can create spaces that foster human interaction and exchanges of ideas. One thing we're doing here is that also we experimented for the first time, is that we have a locationing system. So you check into the building with your iPhone, with an app, and then through the app, you know occupancy in real time inside the building, and then you can control heating, cooling, lighting through your phone. You can have your bubble of heat that follows you, but also you can use this as a platform, again, to facilitate encounter and interaction between people. And with this, I want to tell you a couple of things about this idea of responsive spaces. We did a bit of analysis on the MIT campus, and we saw that today we're wasting a huge amount of energy in places where there's nobody. Think about your homes during the winter. You know, you are here, and the home is still heated during the day. It's just a waste. Or think about your offices. You know, during the night, there's nobody there, they're still heated. And so we looked at that, and if you see, there's no correlation between occupancy and energy consumption. So what we did, we started saying, well, what if we think about a different thing? Again, you know, you can create like a bubble of heat or cool that can follow people as they move through the building. You don't heat the whole space. You just heat where you have people. We called it local warming. We did a first installation outside MIT. That's the main entrance outside MIT. So you would step on the carpet, and this bubble of heat would follow you with your preferences as you move inside. Some people freaked out, but most people loved it. Actually, this became the basis for a research project that led to the installation we did at the past Venice Biennale, the one curated by Rem Koolhaas. So Rem gave us a room in order to show this. Can you think about the future where you have this kind of thermal control that follows people dynamically? What you see here in the video was the making of our Venice Biennale installation. Now, I thought that what I really want to have is a bit of interaction with all of you, and I know that Oliviero, who's a great friend, is coming in 20 minutes, so I will actually shorten a bit the presentation and show you just two additional things very quickly, and so we can then have a bit of conversation. The first thing I want to share with you is, again, you know, if you think about ideas for a mayor, well, it's about shopping and shopping malls. So if anybody tells you today you should build a shopping mall, then you should say no. Okay, you should become an obiettore di coscienza. That's the last thing our world needs, is additional shopping malls. But, and that is, you know, if you look at the United States, that is, you know, what's happening today is that, you know, got all these incredible huge malls that are all abandoned, partially because of digital and the transformation that's happening with digital online shopping. At the same time, you might want to think about new experiences, and those will be meaningful. New experiences like Italy, what is happening there, about new interaction with products. And here I want to share the project we did at the Expo in Milan Actually, it's a pleasure. I see there Matteo Gatto, who was the head of content at the Expo. So we had the pleasure of working with him for 2 or 3 years on this project. And basically, we were given this box and with the idea of doing a pavilion about the future. And every Expo usually has the national pavilions, but a few thematic pavilions. So at Expo Milan, it was Padiglione Zero, the Zero Pavilion about the overall introduction, Pavilion about the future, and a few others. Now, the Pavilion of the Future, the theme that was given to us was about the supermarket. The Expo, as most of you probably know, was about feeding the planet. And if you think about feeding the planet, it's about producing, about eating products, but also selling products. So the topic we started thinking about was how could this change tomorrow? And how to make an experience, not the shopping mall direction, but how can we make a more meaningful experience for people to interact with products? And we knew what we did not want to do. So we didn't want to do this. It's a beautiful picture by Andreas Gursky, but it's an alienating picture of the supermarket of the 20th century. What inspired us was a sentence by Italo Calvino. Italo Calvino has a character called Mr. Palomar. And you know, Mr. Palomar is this character who's a bit provincial, a little bit aloof, and then one day he goes to a cheese shop in Paris, enters a cheese shop, and starts thinking about all the stories behind every piece of cheese. And little by little, the small cheese shop becomes like a museum. Calvino says it becomes like the Louvre. Calvino says this shop is a museum. Mr. Palomar, visiting it, feels as he does in the Louvre. Behind every displayed object, the presence of the civilization that has given it form and takes form from it. So that was kind of our inspiration. How can we tell stories and information about products? If you do that, you can actually start a more responsible consumption pattern. You know more about what you're buying and what you're consuming. And of course, that's not a new question. That's a question that many people looked at. If you look at this, that's Tesco, a big supermarket chain based in the UK, but here it was a project in Seoul, Korea. We look at Tesco, then what they did was think about take your phone, you scan a product, you learn about it, and then you buy it. But again, the question was probably right, but the answer again is a bit alienating. Why would you want to just look at the wall with just digital information, not looking at other human beings? So our idea was different. Can we actually do something like this? And that's you know, a traditional market. That's a painting by Guttuso. It's a traditional market. Look at the richness of interaction between people and products, or people and people through products. So the question for us was, how can we use new technologies to bring that to life? And the way we tried to do it was, first of all, in putting everything on tables. The table has been a beautiful interface. For thousands of years, as humans, we've been using tables to sell things, to share things, to eat together. And so why not use the table as a basis? And then on the top of the table, we put many sensors, Kinect sensors, that the same sensors you got in the Xbox by Microsoft. And the idea is, you know, the sensor does a three-dimensional scan of your body, and then you know what people are interested in. So magically, the initial idea was, imagine you approach an apple. If you want, you can buy it 1 second as you buy normally. But if you got 3 seconds, you can actually learn a bit more about that. And if you got 15 seconds, you might even see the orchard, the video of the orchard from where the apple is coming from. So that was the idea. We did the whole pavilion was done a bit like a theater. We liked the fact that you would see all the products in one go. From the top, you know, you would enter and see all of them. And then you have the different levels of information. The product itself, then information about that product just above, but then at the top, the aggregated information that, you know, combines many, many different products. Online, we all know that clicks are monitored. Now, clicks usually are not monitored in physical space, but with this, you can see again what are the things where people tend to click more. So this was the pavilion, finished. It won a few design prizes, was also very popular at the Expo, had a few million visitors. You see it here empty, you see here the different layers of information. You see here people playing with it. Kids loved it. They would run from one product to the other to see all this accordion opening up and showing you different layers of information. Then information would be very simple. The first information you would get would be carbon footprint, could be about nutritional values, so very simple things, but the more you play with that, the more you would learn about those things. And here in the next slide, you'll see a short video with the experience inside the pavilion. And so that was the project for Expo. You know, the project for Expo for me was a very interesting way to experiment. It's like a giant instant city where you can experiment much more than you usually can in a traditional city or in a historic city like in Italy. So, you know, now some of this is making it to the real world. That's the first real supermarket open using the same technology. Or we're working with Italy on some of the new concepts in Bologna that will open in October. Again, trying to think about how we can create more meaningful interactions with products and how this can help us to have more responsible, hopefully responsible consumption. Apologies with this, I just started to shorten a bit the slides because I want to keep a bit of time for us to talk, so that's why I jumped to the end. But I want to finish with this just in a few minutes. If you look at that, that is how we thought knowledge was. We used to think that in knowledge we could fit everything into the same pigeonhole, everything into the same box. And you know, if you think about St. Thomas, when St. Thomas wrote the Summa, then his idea is that, you know, all of human knowledge can actually be classified and all put inside a book. Well, we now know that that is not the case. We know that if you need to think about a map of knowledge, it probably looks a bit more like this. That's a real map that was built, it was on the cover of Nature. It was built by taking 800,000 scientific papers and looking at the links between them. And if you look at that, you see that no space is an island. You see that everything is connected with everything else. Look at the beautiful links that are emerging between brain research and computer science and social sciences. Now, Nature also looked at the most important pieces of research published over the past decades. A few decades ago, the most important ones were one author from one discipline. You still had the idea you could be like Newton, be at Queen's College in Cambridge, an apple would fall on your head, and you had a great idea, you publish it, and that has a lot of impact. By the way, you measure impact in science using citation. It's a bit like, you know, likes on Facebook. Many people cite you, many people like you, that's impact. Well, people, you know, so in the past was one from one discipline. Today, many different authors from many different disciplines. And I think that something similar is finally arriving in architecture. If you look at this, is our friend Le Corbusier. We started with him, so I thought it was good to finish with him. This is his hand, and he was presenting his Plan Voisin for Paris in 1923. He presented it in a beautiful pavilion called the Pavilion of a New Spirit, or the Esprit Nouveau. And his idea for Paris were rather simple. Basically, bulldoze the same city, demolish all of it, keep just Notre Dame and a couple of other little things, and replace everything with his skyscrapers, these cross-line skyscrapers. And if you look at this, the hand of Le Corbusier, which is the hand of the architect, but almost the hand of God, is, you know, the architect single-handedly making decisions that affect millions of people without even bothering to ask them. But at the time, you know, people said, architecture has to be like this. Architecture is only one architect. It's the old idea, if you've read The Fountainhead or seen the movie The Fountainhead, you know, the single Prometheus as an architect, you know, who makes decisions that affect millions of people, but single-handedly without even bothering to ask. At the time, people said, you cannot collaborate. You know, a camel, there's a nice saying that a camel is a horse designed by a committee. So if you collaborate, you don't end up with a beautiful horse, you end up with a camel. Well, we think that all of that is changing. And we try to make the point in this little book. It's also published in English by Thames and Hudson. We call it Architecture Open Source, but we think that finally we can actually learn from collaboration, from the network, from different disciplines coming together, from multiplexing the process of doing a design in order to actually create a new approach to the way a design is shaped. It's not about the individual, it's about a choral architect, how together we can actually transform the spaces we live in. And, you know, the book is more like, has more questions than answers. The book actually has a nice story because it started when Joseph Grima, who was then the editor-in-chief at Domus, he was running an issue on open source architecture. And he asked me if I could write the editorial at the beginning of that. And I told Joseph, who's a good friend, I told Joseph, sure, I'm happy to do it, but if this is an issue about open source, then we should write it with many hands. And so we started working on this initial text with other people, with friends, with Paolo Antonelli, with Hans Ulrich Obrist, with Joseph himself, with Nicolas Negroponte, with many others. I think Stefano also contributed. And then you really put it online, and it started evolving, kept on evolving on its own. Actually, if you go now to the Wikipedia page, you see that it has been transformed and rewritten probably hundreds or thousands of different times as a collaborative effort. And in the end, however, we had a problem. And the problem is that Domus, when you write an op-ed for Domus, then you need to stick a picture next to the person who did this. And so I got an email before they were going to print. They say, by tomorrow, we need your picture because we are going to print. I say, well, look, guys, this is a collaborative thing. I don't want to send my picture. At the same time, they didn't want to put all the pictures, all the people who contributed. And so in the end, we found a trick. We said, okay, sure, we'll send you the picture, no worries. And we send them this picture, which actually overlaps all the different people who contributed to the op-ed. They were fine with that, and they published it. And I wanted to finish with this, to finish that I hope that the architect of tomorrow, the architect that all of you will be, the architects, the designers, the engineers, will look a bit less like Le Corbusier. That architect that thinks that he single-handedly can make decisions to destroy all of Paris and affect the lives of millions of people. And a bit more like a collaborative, a communal, a choral architect, an architect that, like in this picture, combines the picture of all of us. Thank you.